And joining us now on the debate for the full hour tonight, in New York, New York, Todd Gitlin, professor of journalism and sociology at Columbia University, Betsy Reed, executive editor of The Nation, and Kobe Skolnick, an Occupy Wall Street protester. And with us back here in studio, David McNally, professor of political science at York University, and Janet Conway, Canada Research Chair in Social Justice at Brock University in St. Catharines. Nice to have you folks back here in Toronto. First time on the program for you, Janet, so we're happy to meet you, and our thanks to our guests in New York for coming in. Kobe, I want to start with you since you're right in the thick of this thing. The financial crisis that is supposedly the foundation of all of these protests is 3 years behind us already. People did not take to the streets then the way they are now. So why is this happening now?
First of all, thank you for having me. I think that the general answer for that is the inspiration that we have from Egypt, from Tunisia, from Israel, from other countries, and that kind of gave a backwind for the undercurrent situation in this country. So people saw that it's possible, although there is a completely different situation, but we here trying to fight a different tyranny, the tyranny of the corporate. And it just gave us more inspiration that it's possible, and people can just come to the street and engage in the political process again and try to restore democracy and fight corruption.
Do I understand this right, Kobe, that Americans are being inspired by demonstrators in the Middle East, and that's why it is happening here?
I personally believe so. The problem, as you said, the problem was there 3 years ago, so why now? Because for so many Americans, millions of Americans have been watching what happened in Egypt and what happened in Tunisia, and that kind of showed that, another countries and other people fighting for the rights, and what's going on here, why we are not fighting. And you know, it started very small. I remember the second day we were 40 people going on Wall Street, and 2 weeks later we were 30,000. So that means that the spirit is here. We just need to catalyze it and mobilize more people.
Okay, let me get Todd on that. He's quite right. This started out as something that certainly was portrayed in mass media as being rather insignificant, and it's way bigger now. What's changed?
Well, I have a second reason why I think it's happening now. I completely agree about the inspiration of the demonstrations and the overthrows in the Middle East. I think also, if Obama had lost the '08 election and John McCain had been president, this might well have happened 2 years ago. I think that a number of the people I've talked to in the park were in the Boston equivalent, which I just came back from, actually were involved in the '08 election, had high hopes, probably stratospherically, absurdly high about what Obama would accomplish, gave him the benefit of the doubt, more or less went back to normal, and then only now that he's sort of worn out his welcome with the left, have they felt liberated to do what they're doing.
Okay, Betsy, let me put this follow-up to you then. For those that are in the thick of this thing, and by that I mean the demonstrators, I mean people in the Twitterverse, people in social media, this is a very big deal, and this flame looks like it's burning very brightly. But put it into context, in terms of where kind of most of Middle America is today, is this as big a deal for them?
Well, I think it's pretty remarkable that there was just a poll yesterday that was taken comparing mainstream American support for the Occupy movements and the Tea Party, and Occupy received twice as much support from everyday Americans. Now, that's not to say that a lot of the people who feel rage at what's happened in this country about the loss of the American dream and their sort of frustration with the economy, they're not the same people necessarily as those that are camped out down in Zuccotti Park, but they still have a tremendous amount of sympathy for what these protesters are doing.
Let me get you on that same thing, Janet. How do you gauge how long the tentacles of this thing are into sort of Mr. and Mrs. Everyday America, Mr. and Mrs. Everyday Canada?
Well, I think that, I mean, as others have said, this eruption didn't come out of nowhere. I think it has long roots. I think what we're seeing here is a convergence of many grievances, many activisms, many struggles that are not just in the United States, that are actually very widespread internationally. I think also, I mean, I would say that this is a reappearance of the activist generation that we first saw in Seattle. And
so this is 20 years ago, anti-globalization.
well, it's, you know, it's what? It's 12 years ago.
12.
That was percolating in the 1990s before it erupted so visibly in 1999. But I think we see this very similar modes of protest and organizing here. A very strong leadership by predominantly white student and youth movements initially. Very strongly motivated by values of autonomism, self-organizing, self-management, participation, participatory democracy, a strong critique of representative democracy as it's functioning, and also a strong conviction that you know, the key to both a democratic future, but also I think a sustainable and survivable future is the fact that people have to take things back into their own hands.
Let me pick up on two words you just said there, representative democracy, and David, put this to you. They have chosen to occupy a park, a private park for that matter, in New York City. They have made Wall Street their primary target. But if unhappiness with representative democracy is a part of all of this, why isn't this happening on the Mall in Washington, or why isn't this happening in front of the White House, or something like that?
Well, that's one of the most intriguing parts of all of this. That is to say that these young activists are, in a fundamental sense, throwing back a challenge even to governmental powers by way of saying, you're in the pockets of Wall Street. You do the bidding of corporate power and the banks in this country. You just bailed them out to the tune of trillions and trillions of dollars of their losses, and now you're cutting our health care. Now you're cutting our education. We're looking at mixed jobs for our future. So in fact, in many ways, this is part of the innovation of this movement, that they're saying just demonstrating outside government is not enough. We're going to the sources of real financial corporate power in this country, the people who call the tunes of our politicians. And in that way, they're rewriting the script of what popular protest is all about in a really interesting and exciting way.
Todd, could you weigh in on that? Why is this happening in New York rather than in Washington?
Well, Washington's a very unaccommodating town, you know. I mean, it's not, there are no canyons, there are no narrow streets. It was built actually on that design in order to ward off revolutionary insurgencies. Though those beautiful circles are places where you can mount cannon to ward off the rabble. So, but I think also, I mean, I'm not really kidding there. But in addition, New York, Wall Street is the symbolic heart of the central problem that all these people in their different ways are converging on, which is exactly what we just heard, that the impunity with which the 1% have controlled the politics and the economics, the wealth of recent decades, needs a direct focus. And by the way, I think this helps explain why, even though a lot of media are clucking about how the demands are vague or non-existent, I think people get this. They understand that the financial system, or actually I would say the financial political system, which is woven together, is fundamentally rotten.
We are going to get to the demands later, but Kobe, I do want to follow. Okay, I understand.
Yeah,
Kobe, I'd like you to follow up on that, because I wonder, when you protest and when you've joined your fellow protesters, do you talk about why you're there in New York on Wall Street as opposed to in Washington, D.C. or somewhere else?
Definitely, definitely. Two things. One, I invite everybody to come to the square to see how beautiful young people, and as well as adults, engaging in those conversations and having a real democracy. I think that the sense, at least for my own personal view, but I can tell you for sure that I spoke with hundreds and even 1,000 people in the last month, that the representative democracy does not exist anymore. It's a part of the illusion. When people vote for Congress and Senate, and when they get to the Capitol Hill, they're not really listening to the people anymore. You have an army of lobbyists with hundreds of millions of dollars, and it's too obvious. We are a young generation that know how to read, understand the power structures, understand how it works, and we're tired of it. This is why we don't have it yet demand. This is why we are rejecting politicians that support us. I mean, everybody can support us, but we're not letting them come and speak as they want, because we actually lost faith in them, totally. So for us, it's not a representative democracy, and until we clean the Capitol Hill from corruption, then we can talk about getting back to representative democracy. And the symbolic of Wall Street is that the umbrella of many of the social issues that face in this country and the world related to the corruption. And we all know the political landscape, the economic landscape, as well as education. So basically, we're trying to scream to do our rights as citizens and said enough is enough. We want to change our future. We want to a better better society that care about Earth, that care about every human being.
Okay, I get you, Kobe. I got Janet Conway wants to make a point.
Yeah, I want to make a point about the geography of this movement because, I mean, number one, it started with this call to Occupy Wall Street, which is incredibly symbolic. But there was also almost instantaneously a taking up of that call to occupy in a very decentralized way. So, I mean, I checked Mother Jones' site this morning, and there are 190 Occupy sites now worldwide, the vast majority of them at the moment in the US. 190. And I think one of the most powerful things about the dynamic that's underway is that people are being invited to occupy public space in the communities where they live. It's not about Washington, although, by the way, there is a big Occupy effort happening right now in Washington. And it's where a organized, a pre-planned protest around war spending and the bailout has now converged into the Occupy movement. And they're now calling themselves Occupy whatever it is, Washington Plaza or whatever it's called. But I mean, they're not in Washington. It's just that they're also in many other places. And that's what's really, really dynamic about this. And it's also, it preserves this movement from being prematurely shut down because authorities can shut down in one place and it's not going to shut it down in the 189 other places.
Betsy, or tell me this, how widespread do you believe the view in the United States is that essentially the American presidency, the American Congress is bought and paid for by big corporations and real folks don't have a shot?
Well, I think it's pretty widespread. I mean, if you the level of support that the Congress gets. I mean, we always hear about how Obama is, you know, tanking in the polls, but actually there's a very American people hold the Republican Congress in very, very low regard at this point. There's just not a lot of hope that Washington is going to deliver on its promises, whether you're thinking about the Tea Party or the Democratic Party. So I think in that way, this was Occupy Wall Street was a really brilliant choice of target because people had really begun to understand that the system was broken, and at the root of it, as Todd pointed out, is Wall Street, is the top 1%, and how their priorities through the whole system of campaign contributions, which was accelerated, unfortunately, by the Supreme Court decision in Citizens United. And there's a sense among, you know, activists, professional activists, the so-called professional left, that there's really not a lot that can be accomplished in Washington.
And Todd, when the mayor of New York City, Michael Bloomberg, comes out and says, come on, guys, don't be picketing outside Jamie Dimon's home. He's a good guy. He's created more jobs than almost anybody else in New York City. He creates enormous wealth that keeps the city's coffers full. How does that go over?
Well, I don't think it goes over very well. I mean, for one thing, as Elizabeth Warren is going around saying, you know, nobody creates wealth with their own hands. I mean, that is actually a lot of chutzpah. I thought that was supposed to be the mission of God. And secondly, you know, Michael Bloomberg is a interesting technocratic member of the 1%, a member of the high 1%. He could have done a lot worse, and he seems to have come to his senses last night and decided not to evacuate the park. But he has a very different perspective on all this. He thinks that the world has actually treated him extremely nicely, and that people should get over their griping and behave.
Let's show
Although,
some...
I mean, I don't want to end on that note, though. I think he does seem to genuinely care about the First Amendment, and I respect that greatly. I admired the fact that last year, when we were fighting over whether an Islamic center could be built near Ground Zero, he actually made a resounding statement. It was the first time I actually ever heard him emotional, saying, this is America, we have freedom of religion, people have a right to do this.
And he was one of the first to do so.
He was certainly the only major figure in New York politics, to my memory.
Right. Let's. We do want to show some tape on this because it's possible that some of the people watching our program tonight actually haven't seen some of the pictures around this. So, here's an excerpt of Slovakian philosopher Slavoj Žižek, who was at Occupy Wall Street, and here's some of the way it looks. Michael, if you would, roll the tape.
2008 financial crash. More hard-earned private property was destroyed. More hard-earned private property property was destroyed.
Then if all of us here were to be destroying it night and day for weeks.
Then if all of us here were to be destroying it for night and day for weeks.
They tell you we are dreamers.
They tell you we are dreamers.
The true dreamers are those who think.
The true dreamers are those who think
Things can go on indefinitely the way they are.
things can go on indefinitely the way that they are.
Okay, I mean, you're not allowed to use megaphones, I gather, so they have one person say it and then everybody else repeats it. Kobe, give us a sense of how things are actually getting done in Zuccotti Park where all this is happening.
So we have a pretty kind of strict schedule, but loose, because we're not forcing anybody to do anything. The morning start with coordination of the working group. We have about 30 working group at this point, from thematic teams to food, sanitation, kitchen, to human rights, environment. They meet in the morning and coordinating what's going on. And then we meet the occupiers, those who live in the park, meets to take care of the park. And then all day long, they either lectures or working group coming together and working on their agenda. And at night, at 7, we have General Assembly, which everybody is welcome. And in General Assembly, you have announcement, working group reports, and then sabaks to anybody that wants to speak his mind off. And that is the general schedule.
David, as a means of kind of getting things done, advancing an agenda, how does that sound?
It sounds terrific. I mean, what they're doing is they're saying, we've seen how corporate-run government works. It is bureaucratic, secretive, it manipulates public finances for private purposes, it alienates people. We're going to show you an entirely different form of democracy. Grassroots, participatory, assembly style, where citizens, activists, people come together and they deliberate. What will we do with this program today?
Isn't that what happens already?
Well, it doesn't happen. That's the problem, isn't it? I mean, we've got a system now where you've got heavily corporately funded political parties that can dominate the airwaves, that can try to marginalize dissent. Think of how long it took for Occupy Wall Street to even register in the mainstream media. They were shut out for weeks. That was deliberate. Now what we're seeing is that as they put a different style of politics forward, an entirely different way of thinking about what democracy is, about it being people power, and hence the echoes from Tahrir Square and so on.
Let me play a bit of killjoy here, though, with you, Todd, which is, it's all well and good to sort of do this in a park, you know, over a month, but if you're talking about replicating this on a massive scale to actually replace institutions which you feel are non-representative anymore, I mean, is this really a template we can follow?
I think the answer is no. I mean, I think the world of the people who have occupied the parks and continue to do so. I want them to stay. I want this discussion to go on. It's a huge achievement that this discussion is going on. But most people do not want to spend their lives at meetings in the park. Most people don't like, if they don't like representative democracy, if they don't like the dickering and formality and lies of normal politics, they don't really go for this either. And there's a disturbing element here. I heard before that elected officials should not be permitted to speak because they are implicated in a corrupted or failed representative democracy. Well, I think that's a huge mistake. I saw the other day that in Atlanta, well, okay, but let me go on. There's I heard that in Atlanta, Congressman John Lewis, who is one of the great heroes of my lifetime, was denied the opportunity to speak because nobody wanted to make an exception for a congressman. It happens to be John Lewis, who many times was beaten within an inch of his life in pursuit of civil rights in what was essentially a totalitarian state of Alabama and elsewhere.
And who has now
I think that it is true, hold on, it is true that this representative democracy is deeply corrupted. And it is also true that the representative democracy is not all of a piece, and that John Lewis is not John Boehner. And there are a lot of people who hold office who are not Eric Cantor. and don't think that what's happening here is a mob. So I think this sort of with us or against us attitude is self-limiting and self-destructive.
Let me hear Janet first and then Kobe on that.
Yeah,
okay,
I wanted to say two things. One is that I think the radical character of what's going on in these occupied spaces is not only around popular deliberation, it's also around remaking everyday life. I mean, people are being fed in large numbers. They're being fed with healthy, nutritious food that's been cooked by people there. They are trying to do it in a sustainable way. They're trying to deal with their garbage. They're trying to think about the ecological questions at issue. So there's a way in which this is also about reconceiving everyday life and the relations of everyday life, not just about political deliberation, as important as that is, right? That's the first thing. Second thing is that this kind of politics, I think, that we see here, which is also we've seen in Argentina, we've seen in other movements around the world, where this kind of autonomous street politics. There are indeed some people, who are in that movement who are imagining the demise of political institutions as we know them. However, there's also a much more pragmatic recognition that this kind of politics is also about working and to enlarge the available spaces that we have in a democratic society, to reclaim popular participation, to put on the agenda questions about remaking everyday life in a context when people recognize that there are multiple crises and they're not being addressed by conventional politics.
Pick up on Todd's, Kobe, I'll get you in 1 second. I just want a quick follow-up here. Pick up on Todd's position, which is the reason we elect people in the first place is because at the end of the day, we don't want to do those jobs. Someone's got to go to meetings in the evenings, and someone's got, there's a lot of undesirable aspects of being in politics, right? And we don't want to do it, so we elect other people to do it. And his point, of course, is that that's not going to change just because we've started something in the park.
I mean, I think that as others have said, there's a profound critique and a profound alienation from political parties and from political institutions as they are functioning. And that is a well-grounded alienation. That is not crazy. That is well-grounded, and it's very widely shared. And I don't think anybody is naively saying that the Occupy Wall Street movement is going to create the fall of Congress or instantaneously create a full-blown alternative to it. It's about enacting an alternative in the spaces that exist to start a conversation. I mean, one of the things that's very powerful about what's going on there is that these activists are using, I think, a very deeply rooted American attachment to the notion of the public meeting, of reclaiming public space and a right to speak and a right to assemble and a right to be together, to think together and to talk together, and not to preempt that by having to act within the parameters of politics as usual.
Kobe, come on in here.
Yes, thank you. I would like just to bring clarity from, I spend there 16 hours a day. And being transparent, the structure is not efficient yet, is an organic process, and we're having mistakes and we're correcting ourselves together. Every politician that comes to the square, what we're requesting, we're not telling them not to talk, but what we're requesting is that in the square, you leave your ego outside the square. And when you come in, you're equal to everybody else. So if you like to talk, we have time for people to speak. However, people like Cornel West came over and we let them talk before the General Assembly. And I think that the case in Atlanta was a grave mistake. I don't think it's a reflection of the movement. At the same time, it's organic movement. We don't have due. We don't have a to-do list or talking point. We're just still in this phase that many things are taking place at the same time.
Betsy, the protesters say, though, we are the 99%. In other words, everybody, not the 1% in America who's got all the money, we're the other 99%. And I wonder, based on what you're seeing in the square, Betsy, how accurate does that reflect who's actually occupying Wall Street these days?
Well, I mean, the interesting thing is it's growing, right? And it's spreading, as we've noted. It's all over the country. It's also, last Wednesday, we saw a massive demonstration where many, many unions and community organizations came out and turned out. So I think it's really expanding. I would like to make one point on the question of the relationship of this protest to government. I think there is, as Janet pointed out, a really well-founded skepticism of the current political institutions that we have. On the other hand, government is really the only means we have to confront the power of the financial sector. It's the only that right now, as we talk, those very 1% forces in Washington are trying to gut the Dodd-Frank financial regulation. The only way we can possibly redistribute wealth in this country is by using the levers of government. So I think that, you know, I mean, not to sound like a big government liberal, but I think that we can't lose sight of the importance of reclaiming our government for this cause.
Let's hit it on the head here. Kobe, are you calling for a revolution?
We calling for a revolution, but more in a system shift manner, not in a, you know, upside down. We do want a significant change in the political structures, in the economic structures, and in our education structure. If that's called revolution, so we'll call it revolution. But in my own opinion, we truly want, you know, to deal with the social issue, to deal with the environment, to deal with the wars, to deal with the marginalized community. And if we need to create different systems or shift the system that are existing, we hopefully will do that in the coming months and years.
David, I'm not suggesting they're calling for a Marie Antoinette off with their head revolution, but are they, in your understanding of that word, calling for a revolution?
Well, I think in important senses, yes. But we need to understand that this is a new left in the making. Since the global financial crisis of 2008, the political terrain has shifted dramatically. This is part of a global youth revolt. It has been taking place in the streets of Spain, in the streets of Greece, in Tunisia and Egypt. It's happening right now in Chile with a massive student upheaval. This is something that's happening globally. And as millions of young people mobilize and start to create new movements, they create also new political methods, new political organizations, new visions. And the vision which they're developing has a lot of revolutionary implications. But it's not going to look like the old revolutionary movements of different periods of time. This is a new era with a new way of inventing politics and creating a new left that speaks to our time, not based on perhaps outdated and outmoded models. And so, yes, there is something revolutionary about it, but at the same time, this is the birth pangs. That's why it's so unfair in some ways to say, is it representative of everybody yet? Well, it's a lot more representative than Wall Street, I'll tell you that. Or to say, could you run everything this way? That's not the question yet. The question is it possible for a movement like this to start to redefine what serious, popular, democratic politics might look like for a new era?
Okay, given that question, Todd, how would you answer the question that David McNally just put?
I'm sorry, could you restate that question?
Well, if it's not exactly to replace Congress, but rather it is the beginning of a conversation to kind of deal with the issues that Congress should be dealing with, but doesn't because it's too corrupt, in their words, can they claim some victory on that?
Well, the fact that we're having this discussion and that this is a dominant subject in this continent and elsewhere tells you already this is an amazing success in less than a month. But I think it's very important in these discussions that go on, which are necessary, absolutely necessary, that the occupiers do not make the mistake of thinking that everyone in the country is like them down the line. I completely agree that people are estranged from the political as well as the Wall Street domination. However, I think it's fair to say that there are many more people in what I would call the outer movement, those who joined what Betsy described as the march of unions and community groups and so on. There are many more people who actually want to stay in their homes than want to move to the park. I mean, I'll put that just as a symbolic statement of what's in play here. Most people want, like Move On adopted as its slogan something about restoring the American dream. Most people want the American dream, which is not the same as the dream of, or certainly not identical to the dream of the people in the park. They want suburban houses, separate, individualized, consumerist. They don't want to stop consumption. They're angry that they've been deprived of the ability to consume. Now, I'm not saying that they're right or wrong. I'm just making an appraisal of the state of play. These are some of the players in the situation.
I think
there are many players in this situation.
I think that underestimates how widely this movement is resonating into the mainstream. I mean, the poll that Betsy cited about the Occupy movement being twice as popular, having twice the public support as the Tea Party tells us that. I think that undoubtedly there are all kinds of constituencies where a movement like this hasn't yet reached. But when they raise these issues of economic equality, of political corruption, of foreclosures, of bad education, of poor housing, of racism in society, and so on, I think that's having a resonance that we should not underestimate.
Janet, you want to follow up?
Yeah, I mean, I think Todd has a point.
Stand by, Todd. Janet, then Todd.
Yeah, I think Todd has a point that's important to recognize. But I also want to say that
the point meaning that most people want to stay home.
Well, I think that we can't assume that this automatically reflects the 99%. Okay, I think that's fair to say. But what I think is very interesting is that the occupiers, the activists, are resolutely non-sectarian. They're anti-sectarian. They're making a very, very majoritarian, populist kind of appeal. They think that they represent actually the common good.
Yes.
Right? They're making a very strong appeal on that basis. And they're not claiming to represent anybody. In fact, they're making those kinds of claims. But they are saying that what they are concerned about is about the common good and about a common future and the possibility of a common future. So I think and I agree with David that there is there's a lot of evidence of a lot of resonance, but there's also, there's a lot of plurality within this movement, which is to be expected, and it's part of its richness, and it's part of, I mean, its unwillingness to prematurely identify demands allows for a great kind of pluralism and a great convergence of many different kinds of discourses and many different kinds of demands to kind of come together and find themselves under now what is this very unifying banner, but allowing many kinds of activisms and indeed many kinds of political dispositions, including different political positions vis-a-vis Congress, vis-a-vis the existence of parties, etc. Let me just say one other thing about the revolution question. I think that the heart of the Occupy movement is a critique of the dominant civilization, in that it's raising very profound questions about a productivist society, about a militaristic society, about American imperial adventures in the world.
You're anticipating Chapter 3 of our discussion, and we're not there yet. We're only at Chapter 2, so stand by.
So
that's
I
to
don't
come.
think it's revolution in the traditional sense,
Stand
but
by,
there's
that's to come. Todd, I know you wanted to get in there with something before I move on.
Yeah, a year ago, the Tea Party was identified with by 40% of American voters. Today, it's 20%. Why did it fall in half? I think largely because people had largely delusional ideas about how the Tea Party spoke for them. And then when the Tea Party got some power and they saw what was actually going on here, what they saw was a right-wing Republican movement with its traditional bugaboos. And, you know, they didn't like it so much. Only half of them like it. So the caution here is that, you know, people may love what the movement is doing now, but they're not guaranteed to love it in a year. And doing politics, whether it's revolutionary politics or not, means thinking ahead of the game. We do this, they do that, then what happens? Not simply, we know the truth. Now, you know, it's not a small thing that many people identify with the 99%, and I don't think it's necessarily important at all that there be a common set of demands from the occupations. But you know, I do think it's important that everybody acting in this situation be mindful of a scenario to actually win, and having pure desires isn't enough.
You're tisking here. Okay,
Yeah,
all right, let's hear from Kobe, and then we'll hear what the tiskers in the studio have to say about that. Go ahead, Kobe.
With all the respect to everybody, and truly, you know, I'm just 30, and you all have much more experience than me. I don't feel you getting the spirit of the movement. We are a little bit behind this discussion, at least the conversation that I'm involved in. We believe that it has to be a radical change in every aspect in society to face the problem that we're going to face. If it's the global shift in power that is extremely obvious, if it's the changing behavior to start tackle the climate change and the environment issue, and find solution for that, not necessarily from the government. If the government is not responsive, we the people need to find solution. And there's many solutions. I can give you an example later of just one working group finding ways to use the sun in developing software where to analyze the light in every window in the house, and then the computer will tell you what vegetables you can put in that window. We're talking about serious solution to the problem we face in humanity right now. So it's a little bit political, but much more than that.
Okay, Janet, why the head shake and the tisk-tisk?
Well, I just think that persistently focusing on the question of winning or on the question of success is setting this up in the wrong way. That this movement is about some more profound socio-cultural change. And that to be persistently trying to squash it into politics as usual really risks misrepresenting it.
Problem is we have in North America politics as usual and media as usual, and they're the ones who will frame this thing. Right?
Well, no, that is not true, in fact,
no?
Because the media has been so far behind on this. I mean, it's the activists in New York and elsewhere that they are creating the discourses about this that the media has come along very late in the game and is trying to pick up on.
Well, that's
why we're having this discussion, that there's such misunderstanding, I think, of what's going on there.
David?
Well, the media kept trying to fit it into all of its known slots. Okay, you have to look like this to get press. You have to look like this for us to take you seriously. But in fact, this movement, through its creativity and through its inventiveness, basically said, we're going to do it our way, and if we can generate momentum and a wider public understanding, we will become a story that you have to reflect. But we're not going to do it the way you want, with sound bites and the old-style press releases and so on. And that's something, the fact that the media doesn't get it doesn't make it illegitimate. It simply says that there's something new going on, there's a new language of politics, there's a new style of politics.
And the media better figure it out.
And the media's going to have to figure it out, because you know what? It's going, it's having a resonance in the mainstream anyway.
Let me put, everybody get comfortable for a second, because I got something I want to read here, and it's a bit on the long side. This is by Jonathan Kay, who's one of our finer op-ed columnists in Canada. He's editor of the comment page of the National Post for our friends in the States, one of our national newspapers here in Canada. And as we talk about Beyond Wall Street, which Janet, you were referring to earlier, how international is this? Let's read this now. In response to Occupy Wall Street, conservative pundits have expended much rhetoric in explaining how the Tea Party is more principled and intelligent. But this seems to miss the larger points that both movements are making. One, that you cannot run a successful economy that benefits ordinary citizens if up to 40% of corporate profits are funneled into government backstop financial entities that do little productive work except manage speculative investments. Two, that America cannot be a beacon of freedom abroad if it cannot afford to create a functional society at home. And three, that America's campaign finance system, 24-hour news cycle, and dysfunctional legislatures have yielded a paralyzed political system in which politicians are incapable of tackling existential national problems such as unsustainable entitlement programs, crumbling infrastructure, and 13-figure deficits. As Canadians, we have the luxury of watching all of this unfold from afar, even if some copycat protesters are bringing the same act to our own cities. Rather than sneer, we should appreciate the fact that our politics have not yet degenerated to the level where masses of ordinary people on both sides of the spectrum feel that their only political outlet is on the street. Okay, Kobe, to you first. I notice a hint of an accent there, Kobe. I'm guessing English is your second language. What, is Hebrew your first language?
That is true.
Okay.
Yeah, I came to this country 8 years ago.
8 years ago. So tell us, is this predominantly today, in your view, an American phenomenon?
Oh no, I think excuse me, I think there's three levels for that, for this phenomenon. One is the local, national, and global, and they are interconnected. For at least my personal view is that we're going through a very interesting time in civilization. One is that a little bit post-identity, post-nationality, not in a scary way, but people are more aware about the forces that shape who we are, the perception, the way we grow up, and especially because of the social media, we actually can communicate it. I can speak as Israeli with Palestinians, Syrian, people from Lebanon, all of my country or my part of my country consider enemy, but I can communicate with them online. That is break barrier, the usual barrier that the national borders and all of the foreign policies have been based on. So we have, it's totally global, at the same time local, and at the same time national.
Interesting. Betsy, how about your view on that? Is it predominantly an American thing?
I don't think so. I mean, there are the social media, techniques that this has in common with protests in Spain and Greece and other places. But actually, I think more fundamental even than that is the problem of global mass youth unemployment, and how you see in Tunisia, in Egypt, in Israel, and here in the U.S., we have a generation that's coming of age that has a certain set of expectations about how they're going to live. Yet they're facing massive student debt. They have very dim job prospects. Rates of unemployment that are at historic highs, particularly among minorities. Although what we're seeing in Zuccotti Park is more of the relatively privileged youth. Maybe are bolder at this point in trying to demand what they see as their entitlement in society. But in any case, you see that in all of these different places, and I think it's that the economic driver behind this is quite powerful.
Janet Conway?
Yeah. I mean, I think that it also has a distinctively U.S. flavor to it. Even though it's absolutely part of a global eruption. But that global eruption didn't happen a month ago. It's been happening over the last decade and a half, for sure. And, it ebbs and flows, it comes into the public view, and it recedes.
This is a cousin to the anti-globalization movement.
I think absolutely, absolutely. It's in continuity with that. In North America, I think that movement was set back on its heels by 9/11, but elsewhere in the world, it has still been very, very vibrant. And this is a kind of reappearance of it in the U.S., and I think the conditions have been ripe in the U.S. for this for a long time. And, it has taken this kind of a spark that has captured imagination, but has also provided a kind of unifying banner to bring together many, many convergent activisms that have been, working away on the ground in their localities across the country, for the last 15 or 20 years.
But the added ingredient, I think, that we need now is to put the global financial crisis in there. Because what Janet says is absolutely right. There are these continuities. But what is allowing this movement to resonate much more widely with the mainstream in countries like the United States, Canada, Britain, Spain, and so on, than it could a decade ago? And I don't think there's any question. A bubble burst. We went through a transformative moment in the world economy, and that's opened up an entirely new political period. I mean, youth unemployment in Spain is 45%.
That's true, but I was just going to say about something like Hurricane Katrina.
Oh, absolutely.
In the U.S.
Yeah.
And what that exposed
I don't think there's any doubt about that.
The bankruptcy.
For sure. No, I don't want to downplay the continuities, but I want to emphasize that what gives this a capacity to resonate much more widely than did the movements of a decade ago is that you've got millions of people who've been foreclosed on in the United States. Yeah. You've got massive unemployment, and the youth unemployment factor, Betsy touched on this a moment ago, is enormous. People talked about it as being something specific to the Arab world when Tunisia and Egypt happened. But look at Spain, look at Greece, look at Ireland, look at the United States. These are all cases of a ticking time bomb in terms of youth unemployment.
In which case, Todd, how far can this go?
Well, I'm going to, there are many things in this situation of which I'm uncertain, but let me propose a radical idea, actually, maybe even more radical than anything any proposed. Suppose that this movement, or the core of it, which right now resists demands, suppose that the core of this movement, the occupiers, demanded rescinding debt. This is a very religious idea, by the way, the Jubilee year. Every 50 years, give everything away and start all over again. Right. It's a radical, let's see actually how millionaires make money. Okay, start on your own and see how well you're doing in 20 years. I'm actually serious. I think that it's a very radical idea to recognize that what has produced this mountain of debt, for some people it's mortgages, for some people it's student loans, for some people it's other things, and at least up to a point, let's forgive that debt and start over again. That, it seems to me, is a radical idea.
That is a radical idea. Have you got any seconders for that motion?
Sure, I'll second it.
It's a great idea.
Anybody in Congress prepared to second that motion?
But I just want to say that it seems to me that there's no one demand is big enough.
No one demand is big enough.
I mean, this movement is about multiple struggles and multiple fronts.
Well, let me put this
and
to Kobe
no
if I can.
one demand.
Kobe, let me put this question to you if I can. You know that the Tea Party started and it was a very apolitical thing in the first place, but then the Republicans saw something and tried, many of them anyway, tried to hop aboard that train. And we're seeing the same thing here. There are some rather large unions that are trying to associate themselves now with your movement. There are some members of the Democratic Party that are trying to now associate themselves with Occupy Wall Street. What do you think about that?
I think it's part of the problem because when they see opportunity, we becoming a commodity. We becoming just people for voting, and then they can continue with their own agendas. It reminds me, I mean, it's my own personal view. It reminds me that the corporation look at the numbers and look just in the quarterly figures. They're not looking at the human being behind the work. I believe we need everybody on board, to be honest. We want to non-violently transform society. We need all of them, but we don't want people to come in, which is happening right now. Organizers, coordinate organizers from other movements coming in and trying to push the movement toward their agenda. What's beautiful about it is that
to do that?
Sorry, Todd, say
they do
again?
have the right.
I'm sorry.
They do have
Why
the
don't
right.
they have the right to do that? If it's an open democratic movement.
They do have the right, 100%. This is what I'm trying to clarify. But it's a leaderless movement. So when I'm coming and I'm a one-person voice, that's wonderful. But if I'm coming and I'm getting my commands from the office of another movement, that is not democratic. It is democratic. Sorry, one second. It is democratic, but we want transparency. If somebody engage with us, just let us know that you are organizer for another movement, and then we can have an awesome collaboration.
Okay, Todd, your turn.
Fair enough. I agree with that. But the march that Betsy described on October 5th consisted largely of people turned out by unions, by Move On, and by professional groups, student groups, others. They identified themselves. They had their signs. They had concrete demands. That was actually the bulk. I would call that the outer movement. And it's actually much larger. It's more numerous than the inner movement.
I would love
now, those people, there may well be lots of arguments about tax, tax financial transaction, tax this, tax that, and so on. But they are also part of a movement and a movement to win, whether it takes electoral politics seriously or not, can't simply represent the most romantic ideas, as noble and beautiful as they are, of the people in the parks.
I've got a minute left here, and yes, Kobe, if you would. I've got a minute left here, and I'd like you to speak to what success would look like for your movement. So
let me try to answer. We are part of 100 different movements that the basis, the value and principle based are what bring us together. We have different strategies. Everybody is welcome, the union, Move On, and every party. I just want to be clear about it. And success will be when we will have people on the street and they're shaking the structures that exist and having a serious social challenge to the existing institution until they are changing. And I think it's a lifetime, it's a generational thing. I don't think it's a 1 month or 1 year. I hope that this movement will build and change society in a way that it builds in society. So when we have such a problem, we can be responsive and tackle them in a collective way.
Okay, I want to thank all our guests for coming on the program today and having this discussion about this fascinating new phenomenon. Starting with Todd Gitlin, the professor of journalism and sociology at Columbia University, Betsy Reed, executive editor of The Nation, in one of our studios in New York, Kobe Skolnick, Occupy Wall Street protesters in our other, Toda Rabah. Also, Janet Conway, back here in our studio in Toronto from Brock University, David McNally, a professor of political science, York University. Thanks so much, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.